Wyatt Cole didn't move to the desert to make friends. He moved for the quiet, for the sunrise over dusty hills, for the sound of wind slicing through mesquite trees, not lawnmowers and leaf blowers. After 20 years working under fluorescent lights and classified ceilings, he wanted air, space, and silence. That's what the ranch gave him. The property sat just outside a suburban development that looked like it had been copy-pasted from a magazine ad. White fences, neatly trimmed yards, and porches with matching welcome mats. The homes were uniform, nearly identical, stacked along curved roads with names like Cactus Hollow and Sunset Ridge. On the edge of that perfection stood Wyatt's land, wild open, and absolutely his. He had purchased the ranch fair and square, confirmed every border and setback. His land was private. No associations, no boards, no committees. Just him. His 2 dogs, a workbench, and a house that ran mostly on solar and stubbornness. For a while, no one bothered him. But things changed the moment he put up his fence. It wasn't flashy. Just a steel perimeter with motion sensors and a sturdy gate, all legal, all permitted. But it stood in sharp contrast to the short decorative fences next door. That, apparently, didn't sit well with some. It began with looks. Neighbors walking. Their dogs would slow down at the corner of his lot, whispering just loud enough to be noticed. Cars started pausing near his drive longer than they should. One SUV even backed up to snap a photo before driving off. Then came the woman in beige. She arrived on a Thursday morning, right when the sun hit the rocks behind Wyatt's barn. He was loading feed into the troughs when he saw her car pull up. A compact hybrid with a sunshade and a clipboard on the passenger seat. She stepped out with the confidence of someone used to getting her way and walked directly up to the gate. "Excuse me," it's called through the bars. "Do you live here?" Wyatt straightened up slowly and nodded. "I do. I'm Pamela." She said, "Pamela Crenshaw. I'm with the neighborhood council." Wyatt leaned on the handle of his shovel. "What council?" "Oh, we're part of the community committee that manages the surrounding neighborhoods," she said, smiling. "Just a little too hard. We try to keep the area looking consistent." She pulled a folder from her tote bag and held it up. "I have a few guidelines we like residents to follow. It's nothing too restrictive. It's just basics. Fencing height, paint colors, landscaping, that sort of thing." Wyatt blinked once, then stepped toward the gate. "Pamela," he said, voice calm. "My ranch isn't in your neighborhood. My title and plat map say this property isn't part of anything except the county." She chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure that's what you were told. But a few of our maps show your lot connected. Some of our residents are concerned about the ... aesthetic shift." Wyatt studied her for a long moment, then said, "You're welcome. To leave those papers in the mailbox?" Pamela paused, not used to people brushing her off so easily. "Course," she said slowly, placing the packet inside the box. "We'll follow up soon." Wyatt watched her drive off, dust curling. Behind her tires, he didn't open the folder. Instead, he walked back to the barn, gave a few extra scoops of feed to the cattle, and made a mental note to check the perimeter cameras later. Something told him Pamela wasn't the type to let things go. And he was, right? Because that morning's visit wasn't about a fence. It was about control. And what Pamela didn't know, not yet, was that Wyatt Cole was the wrong man to try to control. Wyatt didn't think much about the envelope left in his mailbox, at least not at first. He had seen enough paperwork in his life to know what to ignore. But this one felt different. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with a shiny emblem that looked more like a country club than anything official. There was no return address, just the word courtesy notice printed across the top. He opened it that evening, more curious than concerned. Inside were 3 printed pages, each packed with small text and bolded phrases. The first page welcomed him to the Cactus Hollow Community Cohesion Project, a name that sounded made up on the spot. The second listed suggestions that read more like demands. Trim all visible shrubs under 3 feet. Repaint any outdoor structure in neutral tones and remove unapproved fencing materials. The third page kindly reminded him of potential consequences for continued non-compliance. Wyatt set the papers on his workbench and laughed. Not a loud laugh, more like a single breath through his nose. He lived in the county, not within a district, not on annexed land. No association managed his property. These weren't laws, they were wish lists. Still, something about the wording struck him as more than neighborly suggestion. It was how they said known compliance without ever explaining what they had the right to enforce. It was the way voluntary adjustments came with veiled threats. Wyatt had dealt with authority before, real authority, the kind backed by systems and consequences. But this was theater, and it was clear someone nearby didn't like. Being ignored the next day, Pamela returned. This time, she didn't knock. She simply stood at the end of his drive, arms crossed, waiting. Wyatt was out front, chaining a flat on his utility trailer. He saw her approach, but didn't stop working. When she cleared her throat, he slowly stood and wiped his hands on a rag. Afternoon, he said. Mr. Cole, she replied, all clipped syllables and tight posture. I wanted to follow up on the letter. Read it, he said. Didn't find anything I needed to respond to. She frowned. These are standard guidelines for maintaining the appearance of our shared environment. We don't share anything, Wyatt replied calmly. Different land, different zoning, different expectations. Pamela took a breath, held it, then pulled a laminated map from her folder. Your lot borders to homes that fall within our oversight. As a result, your land directly impacts our visual landscape. It's reasonable to expect coordination. Wyatt looked at the map. Was the kind of thing someone might sketch with enough time and imagination, but it held no legal weight. Not the kind that mattered. Pamela, he said, voice steady, I appreciate your concern. But your authority ends at your fence line. This ranch is mine. No oversight, no membership, no obligation. She blinked, clearly not used to being told no. There are channels we can pursue, she said. If your choices begin to affect property values, for example, then I'd suggest closing your blinds, Wyatt said, tightening the strap on his trailer. Pamela didn't reply. She turned stiffly and walked back to her car as she drove away. Wyatt noticed something new. A man parked across the street, pretending to scroll on his phone, eyes flicking up every few seconds. He didn't live there. Wyatt would have remembered his face. The rancher stood still for a long moment, watching the dust settle behind her hybrid's tires. This wasn't about trees, or colors, or fencing. This was someone trying to draw a line on a map that wasn't theirs, and trying to erase his without asking. Wyatt had dealt with harder people in harder places, but none of them had shown up smiling, holding a binder full of rules they made up themselves. By the following week, Wyatt could tell something had shifted. The first clue came early Tuesday morning. He was walking the perimeter, checking fence tension, when he noticed tire tracks across the edge of his property. Not his own. Not the neighbor's. These were fresh and angled in from a nearby service road that no one ever used. The second clue was a clipboard. It was sitting in the weeds, near his southern gate. Left behind, maybe dropped in a rush. No name, no badge, just a stack of forms clipped under a plastic cover. The top page had his address and a checklist with boxes labeled unmaintained vegetation, non-compliant structure, and unauthorized fencing. Several were already marked. Wyatt scanned the surrounding brush. No movement, no sound. Whoever had been out here was long gone. He brought the clipboard inside, placed it on the kitchen table, and turned on the kettle. He'd seen surveillance tactics before, slow, careful pressure designed to push people into mistakes. But this wasn't military intelligence. This was suburban chess. And someone had just made a move. That afternoon, a white truck rolled up. Wyatt spotted it on his drive camera before the engine had even cooled. A magnetic decal on the door read County Code Review, External Contracted Services. A man stepped out, maybe early 40s. Business casual with a clipboard of his own and mirrored sunglasses. He made it halfway up Wyatt's gravel path before the gate buzzed open. Wyatt met him halfway, boots crunching slow and even. "Can I help you?" he asked, just following up on a community concern. The man replied, "We received a report about some violations involving fencing height and livestock zoning." Wyatt didn't move. "And who submitted that report?" The man hesitated. "We don't release names." "Of course you don't," Wyatt said, then motioned toward the gate. "You're standing on private land. Fully documented. Zoned for agricultural use. Everything is permitted and filed with the county. You want to take a look at those records? I'll save you a trip." The man looked like he wanted to push back, but something about Wyatt's expression stopped him. "I'll mark this as a clean site," the man muttered, stepping back toward his truck. "Appreciate it," Wyatt said, watching him all the way until the vehicle disappeared down the hill by sundown. Wyatt had reviewed every document tied to his property, permits, zoning, maps, county filings. Nothing had changed. No surprise ordinances, no emergency codes. Just whispers and clipboard games, so he got to work first. He installed 2 new cameras, one near the gate, one on the south edge where the truck had pulled in. Then he set up a license plate reader at the front entrance, rigged to emotion. Alert, it wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. He didn't like being watched. But he really didn't like being lied to. Later that night, Wyatt sat on the porch, sipping coffee as the desert cooled. The sky overhead was sharp and clear. In the distance, porch lights flickered on in the rows of perfect little houses across the road. He'd kept to himself, minded his business. But someone, or a group of someones, had decided that wasn't good enough. They weren't enforcing rules. They were testing limits. They wanted to see what he'd tolerate, and Wyatt had never been particularly tolerant when it came to trespassing in any form. He leaned back in his chair, dogs at his feet, eyes fixed on the road below. They wanted to play a game, so did he. The knock didn't come at the door. It came at the gate hard and loud, even though there was a call button right next to it. Wyatt was in the workshop when the alert pinged on his phone. 2 county sheriff cruisers were parked outside, lights off, engines running. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting the sky in a pale orange glow. Wyatt tapped the screen and pulled up the live feed. 2 deputies, one younger, one older, both standing at the gate with a posture that said they weren't just here for coffee. Wyatt walked calmly to the house, grabbed a folder from the drawer, one he'd been keeping ready, and headed out the front door. The intercom crackled as he spoke. "Morning, can I help you? Sheriff's Department?" the older deputy said. "We received a report about suspicious activity on the property. We'd like to ask a few questions." "Who filed the report?" Wyatt asked. "Can't disclose." That, the younger one answered too quickly. Wyatt paused. "Do you have a warrant?" "No, sir," the older one said. "This is just a welfare check." Welfare check. That was new. Wyatt unlocked the gate from his phone, but didn't open it wide. Just enough for them to step in, one at a time. The older deputy nodded, grateful. The younger one kept his hand near his sidearm. "I'm Wyatt Cole," he said. "Plainly, this is my ranch. Everything here is permitted and lawful. If you'd like to confirm that, I've got paperwork." He handed over a folder with copies of land deeds, zoning approvals, fencing permissions, and animal licenses. Stamped, notarized, and up to date. The older deputy skimmed the papers, nodding as he read. "Looks like you're solid," he said. "We got a call suggesting there were illegal structures being built. Something about weapons training? Sounded like a neighbor's concern, but the phrasing was vague." The younger deputy looked around. "You do have a lot of cameras." "Also have footage," Wyatt said. "Want to see the one where someone flew a drone over my roof last week? Or the one where a man in a beige polo was photographing my barn from the bushes?" The older deputy raised an eyebrow. "You've got that recorded 4 angles. There was a long pause. "We don't get many calls out here." The younger one said. "You won't have to come back," Wyatt said, "unless you're invited." They nodded, this time both showing more respect. As they left, Wyatt stayed near the gate, arms folded, watching the cruisers ease back down the road. The sun had fully crested the hills now. Everything was bathed in warm gold, but the feeling in the air was ice cold. He'd been targeted. Not by the law, but by someone trying to use the law to spook him. That wasn't just nosiness anymore. That was calculated. The line had officially been crossed by midday. Wyatt filed a formal inquiry with the county about the nature of the report, even if they couldn't tell him who filed it. He wanted the exact wording. He also added the sheriff visit to his own log. Every incident, every encounter, every pattern. He was building something. Not just defense, but evidence. Because this wasn't about fences or livestock anymore. This was about pressure. Slow, persistent, behind closed doors. It's the kind of effort that makes most people pack up and sell just to stop the hassle. But Wyatt didn't move under pressure. He trained others how not to dot, and he wasn't the one who needed to back down. He looked over the footage again that night, freezing the frame on the man crouching behind the yucca plants with a long camera lens. The face wasn't familiar, but the license plate on the car parked across the road was clear as day. Wyatt took a photo and started a folder of his own. Wyatt didn't believe in coincidences, not when they came wrapped in legal threats and fake concern. He spent the next few days going quiet, which, for a man like Wyatt, meant he was busier than ever. His routine didn't change. Still, fixed fences, fed the cattle, and walked the perimeter with a mug of black coffee in one hand and his dog, Scout, at his side. But behind that calm exterior, he was watching, listening, gathering the plate number from the drone incident. Traced the man photographing his barn. Identified a contracted inspector who had previously done work for real estate developers and a neighborhood oversight group tied to Cactus Hollow Community Management. Not the county, not law enforcement, a private group. The same one Pamela casually referred to as a committee. Wyatt started digging into that name. What he found made him sit back in his chair. The committee wasn't just a bunch of neighbors making friendly suggestions. It was an incorporated entity, registered 5 years ago as a nonprofit with the mission to preserve neighborhood quality and enforce property maintenance standards. But the kicker was in the board members list. Pamela Crenshaw was the president. 2 of the others were realtors. 1 ran a contracting firm. All lived within 4 houses of each other, and none of them had authority over Wyatt's land, but that hadn't stopped them from trying. The committee had filed multiple community complaints over the past 3 years. Most were directed at homeowners who didn't respond to mailed requests or didn't attend their open meetings. In some cases, the same tactic had been used. Call in outside inspectors, file anonymous tips, and suggest violations that didn't actually exist, but sounded serious enough to cause trouble. Wyatt pulled property records and public meeting minutes. In one instance, a retiree on the next street over had his property reassessed 3 times in a single year after refusing to repaint his tool shed. Eventually, he sold his home below market just to make the visits stop. There was a pattern here, and it wasn't random. This wasn't about keeping up appearances, it was about control. And keeping the right kind of people in line. Wyatt created a digital folder, backed it up twice, and began tagging files with names, dates, and connections. He didn't need rumors. He had receipts. Then, using public access sites and a few tricks from his intelligence background, he began cross-referencing names from the complaint files with real estate transfers. Some of the homes that had been pushed ended up sold to relatives or business, partners of board members. Others were flipped and sold within months. He wasn't just looking at harassment anymore, he was looking at a possible scheme. Later that night, Wyatt stood under the stars, arms crossed, porch light off. In the distance, porch lights flickered in sequence like they always did. Clean, quiet, synchronized. But it wasn't just lawn care and white fences that kept that place so polished. It was fear. It was pressure behind polite smiles and generic letters. But Wyatt wasn't afraid. Not of paperwork, not of politics, not of people who thought intimidation was a form of leadership. He walked back inside. Scott and sent a message to the county development office requesting an official zoning boundary clarification in writing with a stamped map attached. He'd need it soon because he wasn't playing defense anymore. He was going to shine a light right back across the fence line and see who flinched first. Wyatt wasn't the type to go door to door. He didn't believe in rallying crowds with speeches or stirring drama, but he did believe in facts. When facts were buried beneath intimidation, the truth had to be handed out carefully like a lit match in a dry field. So he started with one person. Her name was Judy Keller, soft-spoken widow who lived just beyond the development's boundary in a small, aging home with a faded red porch swing. Wyatt had seen her before, walking her beagle past his gate. She always waved, never lingered. Until last week, when she paused just long enough to say, "They tried it on me too." That was enough to knock Wyatt visited her on a Thursday afternoon. With a folder under one arm and a pie in the other, the pie was Scout's idea, or at least Wyatt blamed it on him. Judy opened the door like she'd been expecting someone, but not him. "I brought proof," Wyatt said. "And something for your sweet tooth." Inside, over 2 cups of lukewarm tea, Judy quietly told her story. She'd lived in the area for over 30 years, raised her kids there, kept her lawn tidy but didn't always plant the right flowers. Last year, she received 5 notices, not legal ones, just ... suggestions. Then came visits. Then anonymous calls to animal control about her dog barking at night. A dog who was deaf and slept through storms. "I didn't want trouble," she said, "so I repainted. I replaced my shutters. I even trimmed back the rose bushes. It cost me almost 4 months of my pension." Wyatt didn't say much. He just handed her a page from his folder. It listed the names of the people on the community committee, including their property connections. Then a second page, financial. Filings showing how one member's contracting business was hired for 5 projects in the neighborhood. All after violations had been issued. Judy blinked as she read. Her hands trembled slightly. "You're not the only one," Wyatt said. "I'm collecting stories, quiet ones, for now. But they don't get to keep doing this." That night, 2 more neighbors messaged him. They'd heard from Judy. One of them had sold his property last year after nonstop suggestions about repainting his deck. The other was a young couple who had received an actual notice, unsigned, warning them that repeated noncompliance could impact property values. None of them were under HOA jurisdiction. Wyatt didn't ask them to fight. He just listened, shared what he'd found, sent them links to public records and meeting minutes. The facts spoke for themselves, and something began to shift. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was steady. People started talking in quiet corners, over fences, in garages where porch lights didn't reach. They weren't angry at Wyatt anymore. They were angry at how long they'd been told to stay quiet, told they were alone, told not to question people with binders and laminated maps. By the weekend, Wyatt hosted a small gathering on his land. Nothing official, no speeches, just lawn chairs, iced tea, and open folders. 12 people came, then 15, then 23. Some brought cookies, others brought stories. One man showed up with a file box full of letters he'd kept for years, all unsigned, all implying some invisible power was watching. "They act like they own the view," someone muttered, "but they don't." Wyatt didn't need to say much. He just listened. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, the quiet voices started turning louder. Because it wasn't just about fences or paint colors anymore. It was about drawing the line. And this time, doing it on their terms. It started with a blog post. One of the younger neighbors, a freelance writer named Riley, had attended Wyatt's last gathering. She hadn't spoken much, just listened and took notes. But a week later, she published a piece titled "When Neighborhoods Go Too Far: The Hidden Pressure Tactics of Private Committees." It was calm, detailed, and well-sourced. She didn't name names, but she didn't have to. Within hours, it went viral across local forums and community pages. Comments poured in from nearby towns. People shared their own stories similar. Visits similar pressure, same tone, quiet threats, dressed up as neighborly concern. Pamela didn't respond publicly. But 2 days later, a thin envelope arrived in Wyatt's mailbox, this time from an attorney representing Cactus Hollow Community Management. It claimed that Wyatt was encouraging hostility and disseminating misleading information that could cause reputational harm. Wyatt read it twice, smiled slightly, and placed it neatly in his nice try folder. Then he posted it online, blacking out only the attorney's name. Above it, he wrote, "When the truth hits a nerve. They don't argue, they threaten." That post spread even faster. Local news caught wind. A small public radio station requested an interview, and Wyatt agreed on one condition: no live broadcast. He wasn't in it for the spotlight. He just wanted to make sure the story couldn't be twisted. When the segment aired, it struck a chord. The reporter calmly walked through Wyatt's situation, the documents, the footage, the pattern of complaints, and the people behind them. The names weren't spoken aloud, but the implications were clear. And anyone in the area who'd ever received an envelope with no return address knew exactly who it was about. 2 days after the interview aired, my first board member resigned, then another. By the end of the week, 3 homes within the gated portion of the neighborhood had 4 sale signs in the yard, all with the same realtor's name, and all connected to the committee's founding group. The pressure they'd used for years had finally started to fold. In on itself, Pamela held on the longest. She hosted a community clarification meeting, inviting residents to discuss the recent misinformation. It was meant to be a reset, a way to regain control, but only 6 people showed up. Half of them just wanted to know if the group had ever had legal authority over Wyatt's land. They didn't get an answer. Meanwhile, Wyatt kept collecting stories, quietly, carefully. A retired school teacher dropped off a binder of handwritten notes he'd kept from his own run-ins with the group. A contractor shared messages showing that board members had requested off-the-record property inspections in exchange for referrals. One man handed Wyatt a thumb drive and simply said this was meant to stay buried. Wyatt didn't need revenge. He needed clarity. And now, the story wasn't his alone. It belonged to everyone who'd been silenced with polite phrases and clipped warnings. County officials launched a quiet inquiry into the committee's conduct. Zoning files were rechecked. 2 complaints were removed from permanent records. And one local official, who had previously approved the committee's permit requests with surprising speed, stepped down, citing personal health matters. Wyatt watched it all unfold from his porch. He didn't celebrate, didn't post victory threads or rub it in. He just updated his folder, made a few notes, and crossed out one final name on a list he'd never shown anyone. The dust was settling, but not because the wind had stopped, because enough people had finally stood up and said, "Not anymore." The morning after the last meeting, Wyatt stepped outside with Scout at his heels. The sun was just cresting the hills, casting long shadows across the dry grass. The air smelled of sagebrush and fresh earth. Near the gate, Wyatt noticed something new, a small wooden sign carefully nailed to the post. It wasn't fancy, just a plain whiteboard with neat black letters: private, property, no trespassing, no logos, no committee names, no threats. Just a simple message, clear and unambiguous. Wyatt smiled. It wasn't the kind of sign that sparked fear or tried to control. It was the kind that said, "This is mine." The weeks since the dust had settled were quieter. The community committee had dissolved, their offices shuttered and empty. Letters stopped arriving, inspectors ceased showing up unannounced. and neighbors who had kept their distance began nodding in passing instead of avoiding eye contact. Wyatt still watched the cameras and checked the recordings, not out of suspicion anymore, but out of habit. Scout still patrolled with him, tail wagging in rhythm with the morning breeze. One afternoon, Pamela Crenshaw's name appeared in the local newspaper. She'd moved out of state, citing personal reasons. No public statement about the committee, no apology. It's just a quiet exit, like the closing of a chapter. Wyatt didn't care about that. He cared about what came next. He reached out to the neighbors who had gathered with him months ago. Together, they formed a small group, but this time with a different purpose: to help anyone new to the area understand their rights, answer questions, and offer support. Not to control, but to protect. Because trust wasn't built with binders and unsigned letters. It was built with honesty and respect. Wyatt's property was still outside any official oversight board's reach, and that was how he intended to keep it. Sometimes, the simplest boundaries are the strongest. He looked at the sign one last time, then added a small line beneath it in black marker. Respect the land, respect the people. Wyatt stepped back and surveyed his ranch, the fence lines, the open skies, the distant mountains etched against a fading sunset. This was home not because of walls or warnings, but because he stood for it, and no matter what came next. He'd always answer the knock on his gate on his own terms.